Hello, everyone. Today's video is about how to configure a telephone network. In Cisco world, as well as a couple of other environments, we classify a telephone network as a voice over Internet Protocol network, abbreviated as VoIP. In a number of companies and businesses, not only are there computers and printers and things along those lines connected to a network, but actually the telephones are. They kind of operate just like computers. So for this example, we're going to show how to configure some telephones that you might see in an office, business, or corporate environment. To do the process, we're actually going to be using Cisco Packet Tracer to simulate some of the devices. So here on Packet Tracer, we see that we have a router, a switch, and two telephones. Now, the cool part about Cisco devices, some of them have the ability to essentially be a telephone system. Everything from voicemail to regular phone calls to call waiting. You can even have video services. So in the event that someone has a telephone with a TV screen or video camera connection to it, it can all run through that device. The devices that we're using to simulate are specific models of Cisco phones classified as 7960s. So when I click on the icon, I can get the attributes are kind of like a GUI or a visual version of the telephone. And here we actually see the back version of the telephone. We won't be able to get to the front version until we do some small things like give it electricity. So to give it electricity, I'm going to actually drag this adapter from the bottom of the screen. That's the thing that's providing the make pretend power to this telephone. And now, since the telephone actually has electricity, I can hit the GUI button and it displays what the front of the telephone looks like. As long as we're here, I'll go ahead and do it on both phones because I'll probably forget later. So I'm going to click on the simulated phone. I'll zoom in so you guys can see it a little bit better. I'm going to connect electricity to it. And then I'll be able to see the front of that phone as well. Now, these telephones are going to be connected to specific ports on the switch, as well as they're going to be controlled by the router. Now, if you try this experiment just by using these same exact devices, it's not going to work because I completed about 60% of the configurations that need to be done on the router before you actually connect the telephones. I even configured the switch a whole bunch of ways before I started this video. So essentially, I'm just going to be using the last 10 or 20% of what you'd have to do to allow these telephones to talk to each other. So what we can start with is we can actually go into the router, and I'll go into the make pretend command line interface on the router. And then I'm going to do some commands on this router. So I'm going to use EN to get into privilege mode. And just to give you an example of some of the things that are already set up on this router, if I did a show run, you'll see things like I've created DHCP pools on the router. And there's a couple of other settings in there. I configured IP addresses on specific interfaces and made these other settings called sub-interfaces. And I engaged something called .1Q encapsulation on the interfaces. And again, those terms that I just used are actually outside of what needs to be done on this router for it to support telephones. But the first place that we would actually start is by setting up the interfaces on this machine that's going to be allowing the communications for the telephone network. Another command that I can use to just see the interfaces so we can see where we're going to be starting from is a command that just displays only interfaces, which would be show IP int brief. Now we can see there's a number of different interfaces that are available on this router. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be customizing this sub interface. So it has the ability to support the telephone network that we're about to create. To do that process, you have to move between global configuration executive mode and going into the specific interfaces that we want to work with. So first we would go config T, and then after that we get into the interface that we need to grab. And just to expedite this video with less typos, I'm going to do some copying and pasting of the commands. So here I'm putting in a command that tells the router that I would like to work with a sub interface. And this interface has this designation of SA0/0.30. You notice the prompt changes. It says sub interface. So that's the specific configuration I'm in right now. Then I need to give that interface IP address settings. This is the network setting that I'm going to be giving it. So it's going to be the primary location that all network communication goes for the 30.1 network. Then, even though this interface is already on, I'm going to execute the command that gives this interface electricity, and that would be no shut. That command turns on the interface. Then, since I'm done with all that, I can either do an exit or an end. I think I'm going to do an end just so I can get back to the beginning of our configurations. Now what I can do is see if those settings are actually there. Again, originally, you see these are the interface settings. I want to see if the new settings I put in there are listed. So I'm going to perform a show IP int brief again. And now you'll see that the interface has IP address settings and it is functional and ready to go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to activate the software on this router, which allows it to control telephones. To do that, I would go into global configuration mode, and then I would type in telephony service. Then hit the enter key. Literally just that fast, I just turned on the software that allows this device to control and support communications between different models of telephones. Now, I'm still going to customize this a little bit. The way that voice over IP systems operate, in the event that you activate the telephony service, it's going to automatically try to give IP addresses and give telephone numbers to phones as you plug them in. So that means randomly, after we go through the process of setting up telephones, randomly, when you plug in telephones, it'll give telephone extensions all over the place. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to put a setting on the telephone service that says don't automatically connect to telephones and give them telephone numbers. The command that stops the telephone service from automatically giving out telephone numbers is what you have listed here on the screen. Now what we want to do is, even though we're only configuring this system for 2 telephones, we can tell this system the maximum number of telephone numbers we will have in the database. You usually configure a system for more spots than you actually need. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell this telephone system that we're going to have at least 3 numbers in our telephone database. And that's done with the maxdn3 command. So that's the maximum number of telephone numbers that's going to be in the database. Think about it like your contact list on your cell phone, or if you're really old school, think about this as a telephone book that you keep all your phone numbers in. And essentially, you're telling this system right now, there's only going to be a maximum number of 3 telephones numbers. So again, just pretend you have a contact list in your cell phone and it only has 3 people in it, or it only has space to hold 3 people's telephone numbers. If you get a 4th friend, hey, you got to get a new telephone. Anyway, so the next command we're going to put in the telephony service is the maximum number of physical telephones that it should expect to try to connect to the router. In this scenario, we're telling it the maximum number of phones that we're going to physically allow to connect to this network is 3. Now, again, in this scenario, we're only going to be activating 2 phones, but this just allows 1 more line or 1 more space in case a new telephone is put in. Now, the next command will give instructions to any phones that do connect to it that it should send any telephone call information or any requests for telephones to this IP address, which happens to be the IP address that we set up on that sub interface. Also, from previous readings and videos, you know there's over 64,535 ports of communications available on any internet line. So we're going to tell it specifically to do all of its telephone communications using port 2000. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do an exit and then do a check. So I'm exit, and actually I could do an end. Then I'll do a show run and look for any of the telephone settings. Those settings should be towards the bottom of the readout. So now here, you actually see the telephone settings that we set up. Essentially, this router now knows it can allow phone calls to come in it, out it, and through it. As telephones are plugged in to this network, it is not to automatically give telephone numbers to the phones. It's also going to hold a database that has 3 spaces for telephone numbers. It's also going to expect as a maximum 3 telephones to be connected, and the IP address and the place where all telephone communications should flow through is this IP address and this port number. That's pretty cool. Let's go ahead and do the rest of the stuff. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start teaching the router the exact phone that's going to be connected and the number, as in the phone number, that should be associated with that phone. So in this scenario, we're going to go into global configuration mode again. And then we're going to tell it we're going to start setting up the settings for the phone classified as 1. Now you'll notice it automatically created a dollar where it says that this line is up and ready. As soon as we type that in, it created that database that's going to hold all the telephone numbers. And it's also going to create the first spot in the database for telephones. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to tell the router the exact telephone number that should be associated with the phone that's classified as phone 1. In this case, all we do is type in number and exactly what we want the telephone number to be. Then I'm going to exit just to move back one stage. You notice I'm back at config. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the second phone. So I'm going to do the second phone. And you notice here, it's like, hey, this is the second phone in the database of phones. And we're going to give this a telephone number of 20. So if anybody wants to call this phone, they should dial 20. Now what we're going to do is we're going to double check all of this work just to see if those phone numbers exist in the router's database. I'm going to do an end as show run. And I get back down towards the bottom for all those different telephone number settings. And now you can actually see that it knows that it's going to have at least 2 phones connected to it at this moment. And those 2 phones are going to have the phone number of 10 and the phone number of 20. Now what we're going to do is we have to actually associate specific phones with specific telephone numbers. The wild part about this is if we did not do no auto registration, we wouldn't have to bother to associate a specific telephone number with a specific phone. Literally, the very first one that gets plugged in would automatically get 10. The next one that's plugged in would automatically get 20. But let's say we accidentally plugged the company boss's phone in first. If we allowed auto registration, then the boss's phone would get the first number in the database, which would be 10. And then if we plugged in the tech support's phone, they would get the telephone number of 20, which would throw all the telephone numbers off and things along those lines. So we have to associate a specific telephone number with a specific phone. The way that we do that is we have to find out the MAC addresses. That's the media access control, or also known as the physical address of the telephone. So you're using Packet Tracer, you can cheat a couple of different ways. But one of the ways is I can just take the mouse and hover over the telephone, and it shows me the MAC addresses. And I have to use the MAC address that's going to be associated with the VLAN 1 interface. In this case, on that phone, it ends with B900. In the event that I wanted to associate a telephone number with the company boss phone, again, if I hover over it, I'm looking for the MAC address that's related to the VLAN 1 interface. And here we see that ends with 416B. So what I'm going to be doing in the router, I'm going to match up the specific telephone number to the specific MAC address so that phone always uses a specific telephone number. So I'm going to go back into the router, and we're going to start this process. I'm going to go back into global configuration mode. And then I'm going to tell the router which phone is going to be using phone number 1 and button number 1. To do that, I'm just going to type in ePhone space 1. You notice the prompt has changed. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the command that says associate phone 1 with a specific MAC address, which you have right here. And then I'm also going to tell it to use the very first number in the database. When you look at this readout right here, the first number is talking about the database. The second number is talking about the position in the telephone number database. So in this case, the first database and the second telephone number, the first database and the first database with the first entry in that database is going to be associated with this MAC address. Then I can exit out. I'm going to do the same exact thing for the next phone. Again, I'm going to tell the router which telephone is going to be classified as telephone 2. And with that, I'm going to tell it telephone 2 should have the MAC address that's listed here. Remember, this is the company boss, the one that ended as 416B. Then I'm going to tell the router that for this phone, it should associate the second entry or the second phone number in the first database with phone 2. And then I'll exit out. Of course, I'm going to check my settings to see what displays. I'll scroll all the way to the bottom. On this operating system, that's where the entries for telephone and VoiceOverIP information is located. And now we see a bunch of stuff here. Ha! We see that it knows it's going to have 2 telephones, even though we made space for 3, but it's expecting now to be able to operate 2 telephones out of the 3. And the one telephone is going to get the number 10. The other telephone is going to get the number 20. The phone that's classified as 1, which is phone 1, it has this MAC address, and it should get the first number. And then the next phone, which is 2, associated with this one, should get this phone number, and this is the MAC address for it. Let's start connecting some devices and see what happens. So now I'm going to grab the cables. I'm going to be using straight cables, and I'm going to go from the interface that says switch. That's the port that is supposed to be connected to a switch. Now you can also use the interface for PC, but that's not for a telephone. Essentially, you can connect a computer into this port, and it can still talk to the network through the phone. So we're going to click the button for switch, and then I'm going to plug this into one of the available interfaces. I'll fast forward it with the fast forward button a little bit. You don't want to hit the next button. The next button reboots everything on the screen. So it looks like everything is green and green. Let's check to see if there's any phone numbers being listed on this switch in any way. As you click on the phone, look at that, look at that. So now the phone is ready. You see it has a make pretend date. Guys, the date is simulated. It's not 1993. But the important part is you can barely see it here, but it actually has the phone number 10. And in the event that we picked up the phone, you basically hear a dollar. Let me turn that up so you can actually hear it better. Well, right now, we don't have anybody that we can call. So let's hang up. Let's go ahead and connect the next piece, phone. Again, I grab straight cable, go from the interface on the phone that's supposed to go to the switch, and I connect it to one of the interfaces on the switch. I'll fast forward it a little bit. And then I'll go into the GUI interface of the phone. Look at that, look at that. Just that fast. This phone actually shows that it's ready. It has electricity flowing through it. You can tell because the light's blinking, and you can actually see the telephone number. So this is the company boss, and they got the right telephone number. Let's bring up both phones. So now we got both phones active. Let's go ahead and place a phone call. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call from this phone, which is 10, to this phone, which is 20. A couple of ways I can do it. First, I'll pick it up for a dial tone. Now I'll dial the phone number. 0. You now see that this phone is being called. This is the telephone number that it's coming from. If I pick up the handset, the phone is ready to go. And of course, we can end the call. Let's try it the other way. Again, here's our phone. What we can do is lift up the handset, and then I can dial 10. Here we go, 1, 0. Look at that, look at that. The phone number, the phone is now ringing. That's the process for creating a voice over internet protocol telephone system. Now, there's a lot of other things that you have to configure on the router itself to make it be able to support the telephone system, but these are the base commands that you would use. So I hope this video has been helpful. You guys have a fantastic day.